This is Outfoxed, the podcast brought to you by Hunter.io, the trusted lead generation platform built for every B2B professional. Get ready for no playbooks, no posturing, and no egos. This is the show for the builders and not the theorists. Your host is Hunter CEO Matt Tharp, and his guest today is Joel Simkins from XST Capital. Let's get into it.
Welcome, Joel, to Outfoxed. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Matt, great to be here. Excited to have this conversation.
Same. So one thing, you're coming in sort of mid-conversation to something, so I'll bring you into it, see what you think. We've been talking about seasonality, and there seems to be a trend in sales conversations about summer being seasonally down, especially like June and July. This, by the way, seems to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everybody starts to think it's low, and then before you know it, everybody is talking about July like no one works in July. I'm curious, in your space, is that true for you? Is this a seasonal issue?
No, we're really, really busy. We launched our business a little over a year ago, and we've got a pretty big pipeline of clients and deals that we're working on. But interestingly enough, our business is somewhat counter-seasonal just because we focus a lot on the digital gaming industry, which is really fast-growing. And a big facet of that digital gaming industry is sports betting. So as we have this conversation in late July, a lot of my clients are gearing up for NFL, which is a critical time for the industry. So we're actually trying to stay in front of people ahead of this ramp in activity. So we're honestly always prospecting, always out there touching upon people. And our business sort of ebbs and flows around different industry trade shows and other kind of key milestones like the NFL season.
For those who don't know as much about the gaming industry, which I'll count myself as one of those, talk to me a little bit about, I'm sure that category is broader than I expect. So kind of who fits into this digital gaming category?
So sports betting and online gaming are still a relatively new phenomenon in the US, at least from a legal and regulated perspective. So I've been in the gaming industry for almost 30 years. Call it 25 of those 30 years were heavily focused on land-based gaming. So I've probably been to Vegas 300 plus times in my career. But with sports betting effectively being legalized in the Supreme Court in 2019, that opened up a flood of activity in the sector. Sports betting online gaming had been legal in Europe for, call it, 20 plus years. So we're sort of seeing the role of that space. So you can have traditional big companies that most people are probably familiar with, like Caesars Entertainment and MGM. And then you have sort of the new powerhouse companies like a DraftKings and a FanDuel. We're focused on a lot of the smaller, earlier stage startup companies that are around the entire ecosystem. That could be marketing affiliate companies, that could be fintech businesses, that could be B2B technology providers, that could be sportsbook or online casino operators. So there's a really wide industry. And the thing I love about the space is it's still a young industry, and we're really working closely advising and helping a lot of these companies grow.
So fun fact, I've been doing software for 20 years, and about 16 years ago, I got a chance to visit Gibraltar because we were working with a bunch of folks in the gaming space. So now that it's legalized, how do we not have Betfred posters on every wall in big cities now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say, if you asked me that question 5 years ago, I think that was the expectation. A lot of these European companies would be dominant. The reality is you had that big land grab where FanDuel and DraftKings, big brands, the land-based guys have sort of entered the space. But you do have some European players, probably the most notable players, Bet365. They're a massive company. Some companies just realized it is a local kind of boots on the ground game, and it was going to be a significant number to be really, really relevant. But this is an incredibly dynamic industry, and I could talk for like 5 other podcasts on the different nuances. You have daily fantasy sports like Prize Picks and Sleeper, which people might be familiar with. You have what's now sweepstakes casinos like Fluff, which if you ask somebody under probably 25, they probably have that app on their phone. So there's a whole lot of interesting insights and innovation, but it's an incredibly fast-moving sector.
This is primarily the sector you've been in for most of your career?
Yeah, I fell into gaming literally right out of college. I started my career as a bond analyst at Moody's covering the gaming industry, and versus, widgets or something really, really boring, I just happened to luck out. And fast forward, 28 years later, and you're running your own investment bank focused on the gaming industry. But, again, what really gets me excited is being an entrepreneur and founder, but also working with early stage startup companies who move fast. And we really help them, again, from a capital raising an M&A and strategy perspective. And that's kind of really how I found Hunter as a tool, because when I was working at a large investment bank, we had other prospecting tools, but there was a whole special team that did the prospecting for us. When you're running a small, lean organization, you find tools like Hunter that, make your job a lot easier and allow us to be efficient. And just not to plug you guys too much, but like when we're running an M&A process, like we're working on a deal right now, can't name the name of the company we're working with, but they wanted us to run a very broad process. And we went out to call it 200 plus buyers. I legitimately knew a third to half of those buyers really well, but there were certain emails of CEOs and corporate development people and other strategy folks that we want to get to. And versus having to pick up the phone and call my friends at XYZ firm, hey, do you know this person? Can you connect me? This is a way to obviously bypass that. And we've had a lot of accuracy and success and really kind of running down anybody that we need to get to. So it's been a nice way to look a lot bigger than we are and move a lot quicker than I could have in the past.
Okay, my recollection of the gaming space is that it was, what's the right word, insular a little bit. It's like if you wanted to get in, it was tricky, but once you were in, you could kind of get established. So like, how do you build your target market? How do you build your audience?
Yeah, it's definitely a cottage industry, and people often say that really owing to the fact that it is generally a highly regulated business. And I would also say, I think, we could be talking about gaming, you talk about fintech, other sectors. I think at the end of the day, people do want to help each other out, and it is fairly collegial. I've always been a prolific networker. That was really how I was able to kind of launch my own business. I sort of had my own brand. Being a former equity research analyst, one of those talking heads you see on CNBC and Bloomberg, people do know who I am. But obviously, when I was going from large investment banks with really nice logos and calling cards to starting my own firm, X Capital, right? Well, I know Joel, but who's X Capital and what are you guys doing? Are you guys investors? Are you investment bankers? What's your modus operandi? So we've been doing a lot of kind of traditional marketing, whether it's speaking at industry conferences and trade shows. We've also kind of hit on a very successful formula. I'm not in the podcast market yet, but we started a newsletter not long after I launched the business. And being a former equity research analyst, I came up with an idea of basically interviewing different CEOs and other folks in the gaming industry, companies that could be clients of ours, companies that we might want to be clients, or people that we felt like, we could really be helpful in terms of building their brand. So we put together a pretty exhaustive database, really from what I've had over nearly 30 years in the industry, in addition to supplementing it with tools like yours. And I think we've published 21 newsletters since I launched. Really, these newsletters probably started last September. So we've been pretty prolific at these newsletters. And we're using things like Constant Contact to track our metrics and readership. And the metrics honestly have been off the charts versus the industry, versus other kind of read rates from when I was an equity research analyst. And it seems to be working. And now it's really people coming to us saying, hey, we want to participate in your reporting of the industry. So it's been really helpful. And that's been a way to really kind of turbocharge our brand and help kind of create lead generation.
That's great. So have you seen, like you said, it's kind of gangbusters or leaps and bounds, like give me an approximate growth rate sort of quarter over quarter for the newsletter.
It just continues to grow month by month. So right now we go out to let's call it roughly 3,000 industry investors, strategic executives in the space. That newsletter maybe had 1,500 names on it when I started it. So it continues to grow, and also pretty active on LinkedIn. And being an investment banker, we're really limited in terms of what we can do from a regulatory and compliance perspective. So to come on your podcast, I had to get that approved by our broker dealer. So I can't be out there on Twitter and other sorts of traditional social media pumping up or really, really hard advertising my business. So I need to do things like this newsletter. We are allowed, within reason, to highlight our business on LinkedIn. And I'm pretty, anybody that Googles me, we're on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active in either publishing just anecdotes about running our business day to day, different wins we have day to day, different team building events, and the culture that I'm developing at my company. So, we're really kind of working all the channels in our toolkit.
Sounds like a great, thorough B2B motion.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I highlight too is we do have a big NFL kickoff piece that's going to be out in mid to late August, where we're going to interview roughly 30 gaming industry CEOs. And this is similar to what I did last year, but on steroids, a lot bigger. And I'm already working on different ways to kind of blow that up in the media in terms of just other traditional publications, whether it's the Journal or Bloomberg, other verticals that would hopefully take some of our takeaways and kind of more widely disseminate it. And the other thing I'll just add too is you have to find other champions in the industry to help you out and tell your story. So in addition to our database, there are other industry trade publications in our sector, and we've worked out partnership agreements with those trade rags who also republish our product either on their website, or we'll take snippets of it and send out to their equivalent of a Substack. So that really sort of magnifies. So the true reach is much greater than the 3,000 that are on the database.
You actually got to the question I was going to follow up with, which is a lot of people will tell you email is dead or newsletters are dead or, it's too difficult to get an audience going. Talk to me about the first few tactical things that you did to try to get the newsletter out there. You talked about finding other industry voices that can help amplify, which I think is great advice. But what are some of the other great tricks that you've figured out?
Call people that have done it and ask them for advice and tricks and tidbits. So I think when we first put it out, the first one or two versions, they're, using Adobe and other kind of different templates. And I did it. I'm 49 years old. I'm relatively tech savvy. But after a couple of those versions, I was like, okay, that's good. But I had my 20-something analyst who's much more technologically literate kind of jazz it up and kind of get a fresh perspective. Now, I also asked other people. There's another person I know quite well who's in the investor relations space who does a similar newsletter. I've been reading his newsletter for years, and good friend of mine, and he's always got some interesting hooks in his newsletter. I find it an interesting read. So I was like, hey, what are your best practices and learning? I also think in the age of AI and other, technology, you can use some of those tools just to kind of make it a bit more punchy. And also now that we've got a library of content, for instance, at the end of 2024, we published, and the newsletter is called The Next. It's The Next with X Capital. We kind of created a best of the next where we basically fed all those into ChatGPT and said, okay, what are the most interesting quotes, takeaways, tidbits, kind of a Cliff Notes version for somebody who wants to kind of hear what all these different CEOs are saying about the industry. So we'll certainly do another one of those at the end of 2025. And I think there are other kind of versions of the document that we could come up with. But I'm certainly thinking about ways to continually make this interesting. And if you're able to look at our constant contact, you're seeing that the percentage reads, the click rates, all that continues to track higher. And I honestly tend to geek out on it. I'll look at it the day of, the end of the week, a week later, just to see how it's sort of incrementally flowing. And then we'll obviously redistribute it on LinkedIn, and we ask our clients or anybody that's participating to kind of go out to their own channels that they've got to distribute it.
So now this is how you promote the brand, how you promote yourself. But when you were first spinning out, you said you've got a name, people know you in the industry, you've been in the industry for a while. But when you split off onto your own, I know you had to probably go out and get your first couple clients. Talk a bit about how you went out and did that in the very beginning of the business.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I honestly was torn between going to traditional investment banks like I've worked at in the past. I worked for a lot of big companies, or doing my own thing. And quite frankly, I just had a lot of folks coming to me directly and saying, hey, when you're back and able to work with people, and I had a non-compete, so I had to be very careful to not trip in it. But once the clock is ended on that non-compete, we should stay in touch and figure something out. So I had enough interest where I felt like this is going to be feasible. And I think every deal you get done, every client you're successful with and onboarding with, you try to get a little bit more aggressive in terms of making sure you're getting the value that you think your brand and your name and kind of your capabilities are worth. And obviously it was much different when it was just myself doing this at my kitchen table. Now I've got a team of almost 10 people, including our full-time employees and interns and other people kind of involved in the business. So we have a little bit of scale and operating leverage, and we can really just be aggressive, not to mention a track record. Like anybody that's signing up with us now gets a chance to see how high quality our materials are, how we run a process. They see that, okay, X Capital has gotten other deals done. They know what they're doing. It wasn't Joel at XYZ Bank. That was the only reason he's successful. It's really the team and the capabilities that we have and our collective knowledge.
That's present state, right? You're up and running. But I have to imagine, especially since there's a lot of founders or entrepreneurs or maybe even sales leaders who are thinking about making this jump for themselves, they have a Rolodex, although half the people listening to this probably know what a Rolodex is. I appreciate that you do, Joel. But what was that moment for you when you were like, okay, non-compete is done, there's something here where I'm like, okay, this is the next step for me. What was that trigger for you?
I would say the moment it all sunk in was when the first check came in. Actually, before I landed an investment banking assignment, we were doing a kind of a biz dev exercise where a company, I can reveal this now, but a company called Mojo, which I've had a great relationship with their management team in the past and very respectful, interesting group. Mojo has raised a bunch of money in sports betting, online gaming. They pivoted from their original business, which was operating an athlete stock market, to being a B2B odds provider for the industry. So I had a great relationship with that team. The CEO and co-founder is a guy named Vinit Barara. Vinit was the co-founder of diapers.com, which had a massive exit to Amazon many years ago. His business partner is Mark Laurie, who went on to do Jet.com and Wonder and a lot of other successful startups. So I got to embed in their office, basically being an outsourced sales guy for them. And when that first check cleared and I was able to go back to my wife and say, we got money coming in, like somebody actually values me, it became really like, okay, we're on to something. But, I think you have to be always pivoting and looking for the different way to ring the register. And our logo says Capital M&A Strategy. And it was initially the strategy piece, which is where this business development fits in. The other sort of epiphany moment for me was, again, being a former equity research analyst, I kind of know how the game is played. I know investor relations and dealing with the investment community, whether it's buy side, your mutual funds or hedge funds, or the sell side being the former equity research analyst, of which I did that for a long time. So we've actually been doing some investor relations, what I call strategy for people. I'm not writing press releases or doing quarterly earnings prep for people. I'm really helping management teams recraft their investment narrative, helping them get access to investors. And that's become almost a bit of a side hustle for us, but it does pay well. And it really leverages something I can do in my sleep that I've been doing for, a long, long time. And we've had one really successful client and we're about to hopefully onboard, fingers crossed, probably two more in that vertical. So it's interesting. Some of the people that do investor relations in the game industry think I'm encroaching on their turf. And I'm like, well, I'm not really going into your business. I'm really think of the golf coach who says, okay, tuck your elbow and mat, keep your head down in your swing. I'm really giving, the CEOs or CFOs, particularly these are small cap companies that don't have a lot of coverage or following or have never run a public company before, just kind of that advice of here's how you can be a more successful telling your investment story to people. And, we've done some prospecting, probably using Hunter in terms of expanding this IR practice. We did a big push recently, got a lot of very quick response because we've had a good case study. We got a recommendation from our clients that we're able to leverage, and it's working out well.
That's amazing. And not just because of the plug. For those who don't know, if you're listening, Hunter is obviously the sponsor of Outfoxed / our day job. So James and I get to do this from both sides. Both we're the buyers. We're saying, hey, Outfoxed, put together something we want to sponsor. And then here we are. So this actually, you bring up an interesting topic indirectly. And so that is that you mentioned a bunch of things about business development and sales. You wouldn't call yourself a salesperson, would you?
No, but I'll tell you, when you're an investment banker, right, we are, I don't want to say we're like real estate agents, but, we are in the sales business. Like, yes, AI is going to take over the world, but we are still, for let's say maybe the rest of my career, hopefully, we're still very much a human-to-human relationship business. And I'm just making really high level sales calls at the end of the day to CEOs and board members and other kind of CFOs and other critical decision makers. So I definitely have competitors and I think we've got different strengths and I'd say way more nimbleness than others. But for me, it's really just taking collectively almost 30 years of industry knowledge, relationships to kind of do my job. But I will tell you, people often ask me, and I've spoken at my alma mater many times and a lot of other panels, like, what was the most influential job that prepared you for your career on Wall Street? And I often chuckle, and if my 81-year-old father's listening, I did actually work 2 summers as a high school telemarketer. My father had a business that he was doing some consulting for back in the day that ran some telemarketing activities, and I was selling cable television packages, Showtime and others. And, when you're making like 100 phone calls a night and you're getting like people hanging up on you on 98 out of 100, you become very adept and resilient at taking rejection. So that's honestly been great training. And our business, there's plenty of rejection. I mean, for every sales call we make, right, only if you are going to lead to potentially getting hired, but you just sort of spring back up and just water off a duck's back and on to the next phone call. So that ironically, a long time ago doing telemarketing in high school somehow paid off.
Today's episode is brought to you by Hunter.io. Finding the right email address for your leads can take hours, but with Hunter, you can go from search to send in minutes. Get started for free with Hunter's verified data, lead management, and email marketing tools by visiting www.hunter.io.
Okay, you've run the gambit. You've seen a lot of this. You've probably done a lot in your life. One of the things that's interesting with our audience, there's a few things that we've learned. One is there are a lot of people doing sales activities, but they don't consider themselves a salesperson. And with that comes an almost aversion. It's like, well, but that's selling. It's like there's some sort of imaginary line that they are afraid to cross. And I think especially in the tech space, right? You get a lot of technical founders who are like, I'm going to work up to a certain point doing some of these things. But I think I've had some experiences very similar to yours where if you haven't had to dial and then literally have your manager play back parts of your last call and tell you how you could have said this better or differently, like if you've never gone through that kind of grueling thing, it can be intimidating because you don't kind of understand the sort of iterative nature of getting better at it. But also, I think in most industries, cold calling is dying rapidly. And so this idea of like just sitting there hammering out calls and having that lead to success is also kind of going away. But you use Hunter, which means you're also doing email. Can you talk a little bit about how building a pipeline is so much different today than it has been in maybe years past?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not just picking up the phone cold calling people. It's really creating warm leads. So we'll typically send out an email with our script, which explains kind of who we are, what we do. We'll try to come up with some sort of anecdote. Hey, I saw you at a conference, or I read about you guys on LinkedIn, or hopefully somebody made a referral. Hey, I spoke to this client. They recommended we connect. Let's find some time. And then we'll also send some collateral. We've got, call it a 15-page slide deck that explains our firm and what we do, which I think is helpful. I mean, it looks very good. It's credible. And we'll maybe tag on a copy of the Next, which is our newsletter. And then we'll just kind of work there. But, every week, no different than when I was working at big investment banks, I sit down with my team and we go through our active pipeline, the deals we're working on, companies we're talking to that might be an opportunity, and those that we're prospecting, or in advance of going to a trade show. Hopefully we'll able to get a list of who's attending, and we'll start prospecting those folks in advance of the show and saying, hey, we're in town. We were just sponsoring a big conference called the Fantasy Sports Gaming Association, and we've been successful at that event. And, we were at that event in July in Chicago, and we looked at the list. We're like, okay, there's probably 10 or 15 companies on this that we ought to get in front of. So it's like, hey, we're in Chicago. Let's grab a coffee. Let's say hello. If you're too jammed up during the conference, let's try to find some time. And couple weeks after to circle up and chat. So it's just something you have to sort of like tend to, like a garden. You've got to really just be programmatic about chipping away and finding out. Again, most people are willing to get on the phone and tell you a little bit about their story. And you can sort of evaluate either real time when you're having that conversation or subsequent with your team. Hey, that's one we should follow up on. Or maybe let's just put that in, let's call them once a quarter and kind of see if there's something interesting to do there.
You described going over pipeline. Is that something, spreadsheet, tool? Like, let's talk tech stack for a second. That's one of our favorite segments. What is the tech stack that you use to drive sales for your team?
Yeah, I would say, listen, it's not rocket science. I think there's definitely areas for us to get better. So, it originally was just an Excel tracker. Our broker-dealer has a database that's kind of a Salesforce equivalent. We are doing a much better job of inputting these calls and tracking our records and kind of creating a bit of a reminders and calendars to follow up. So we're not that sophisticated, I guess, to answer your question at this point. As we get a lot bigger, and let's just say there's other, senior investment banking platform or partners on our platform in the next year, I think we'll be much more rigorous in our approach. But our prospecting is in the hundreds, not thousands. And we can only do so many deals at a time because, they take a long time. They're very demanding. Our clients, when you're an investment banker, it truly is a 24-hour-a-day job. And I'm always accessible and reachable no matter where I am. I was on vacation recently in Latin America with my family, and we're about to go river rafting in the middle of nowhere in a jungle. And I'm like sitting there, like, in the van, like on my phone, responding to emails, because you have to be accessible. So we have to be very selective in a day. Now we can afford to be selective in terms of the clients we're going to onboard.
So you've got CRM, Hunter, of course, you got to have that. Are there other tools? Do you use like automated dialers, or is it all fairly manual?
It's all manual. I mean, it's mostly email and email, then lining up calls. And we're using your Zoom and other channels. We are using a lot of other kind of AI tools for just our, note taking and things like that. This seems to be very commonplace right now. And more often than not, a client reaches out to us, they've got their Zoom call recorder, taking notes in tandem. And we'll use that to some degree when it's available, kind of getting the most out of our calls and making sure we can leverage things. And listen, that's the beauty of a lot of these tools. When I was working at big banks, right, that was something, I had a 9-person team at my last firm. And I could have a first-year analyst taking copious notes, sometimes better than others. But now we have these tools that we can leverage. We go back and run the traps for different factoids or other detail that we want to get out of it.
It's great, though, to hear you talk about that, because there's a misconception out there that tech stack is what's really going to determine your sort of success or failure. And while it's true there are certain things that everybody should do, and my biases aside, I think verifying the data in your database is a pretty good place to start. But just getting it organized in a single place that is a source of truth, verifying that data, keeping it clean, these are kind of the standards. But beyond that, it's the tech stack isn't make or break. And hearing you talk about how you can build that business with a fairly minimal, always been a strong believer that let the demand on the business drive how much tech you need, as opposed to trying to do it the other way. And it's great to hear you say that. I think a lot of people need the encouragement that a couple of tools is a good place to start.
For sure. We could get a lot better at those. And, again, we're affiliated with a broker dealer that really handles our back office compliance, legal, regulatory. And I've become very good friends with the CEO of our investment bank, Stonehaven, because we're power users. We're growing rapidly. And, he's often ribbing me like, Joel, you've got all these tools in-house. You guys could do a better job leveraging. I'm like, I know, but I'm in the middle of executing deals and the team's busy. And it's on the roadmap to get there and do a better job leveraging that stuff, but it just takes time, and we've got to kind of pick our battles where we can.
How big is the team that's doing sales-related activities with you?
It's a couple. So I basically have farmed that out to our analysts and associates. And one of them, basically his role, and again, when I was at a former large investment bank, we had an entire team that did prospecting, that had tools like Hunter amongst other tools. And again, I don't have the budget to hire a person whose sole job is prospecting. So that's just on their list of daily activities. And Andrew on our team, he does a lot of the prospecting, sort of have an agreement like every Monday you need to go out and ping 5 or 10 people. And he's very good at finding just different ideas through industry podcasts, other trade rags of, hey, this person appeared on this show, or there was some news story about this company. We ought to reach them. And the reality is we have such a big database and Rolodex where, again, a lot of the calls are inbound now as opposed to outbound. But I think you've always got to be prospecting and kind of finding out about new potential clients and opportunities.
I agree, but I have a concerted interest in that being true. But I think, look, channels change. Industries change. If you're not constantly trying to keep that awareness out there and keep building that pipeline for the future, it's not going to be there when you most need it. And I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah. And our business at back to our earlier conversation around cottage industry, it's only so big, right? I'm not trying to sell to millions. I'm trying to sell to like tens every year of people, right? So we might cast a relatively wide net, but it's nowhere near other kind of technology tools or services or companies that you're probably engaging with who leverage it in a different capacity.
This is great. All right. A couple pieces of advice for people who are listening. So the first question I have for you, has anybody ever sold you via email? Meaning, have they opened the door, got the whole thing going? Have they cold emailed you and then turned that into revenue for them?
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, funny enough, even my personal accountant, she actually sent me a letter, which is really, really ancient. But, yeah, she sent me a letter and it was kind of personalized. And at the time, I was like, "Hey, I need a new tax person. I need to just kind of get a little more sophisticated." And she kind of sent me her background. So it's like right place, right time, and need. That's not always going to be the case. So sometimes these old fashioned channels work, but maybe because I was a telemarketer in a former life, I'm a little more empathetic. But sometimes, yeah, I'll get a cold outreach that might be effective, or at least, okay, maybe I should hear it, or just willing to take that pitch and see where it goes.
So if you're going to give, last piece here, if you're going to give advice to anybody who's going to be writing an email to try to get into somebody in the finance industry or gaming or what have you, like what's a piece of advice that you think people need to hear?
You just try to make it look like it wasn't written by AI. I think people are really honestly leveraging these tools a little bit too much right now, where it comes across as really cliche or cheesy or a little too, they'll find out something about me or my business and it'll be like, "Oh, I heard about all the success you're doing, or I went to this school," or you just try to come up with a unique hook, I think, to get people versus the obvious flattery. I think the best way is through referrals. So I think it's finding that 1 degree of separation or 2 degrees of separation is somebody that can be your champion. So for instance, this investor relations business that we've been kind of trying to grow. This client, that was our first client in investor relations, developed a really good relationship with the CFO of this company. And I just said, "Hey, it would really mean a lot to me if you could be a reference and write sort of a generic letter that just talks about how we were helpful and what we've been doing with you." And he wrote, I really didn't give him much feedback, and he wrote a glowing review that it couldn't be any better. So as we were prospecting for new clients, we obviously had our collateral on, here's what we do from an IR strategy perspective. And if you want to hear it, here's what the CFO said. Happy to put him on the phone with you anytime. And that was instant feedback. I mean, hopefully, fingers crossed, 2 of these clients that were looking to onboard, I mean, I literally got responses from their CEO and CFO the same day that we sent this email out of like, this is exactly what we're looking for. I'm glad we connected. So for me, that was a nice moment.
Was it a long email or was it fairly to the point?
No, it was probably 4-paragraph email, so pretty tight. And then along with this reference letter and then an overview of our services. And that was sort of like a 5-pager on kind of what we do. And the other thing, just to go back to your question around advice, right? You've got to be really, really tight with your delivery. We all have ADD. We all don't have enough time to read our email. We're just going to scan the first thing that pops up. Just be really crisp in your messaging and your storytelling. And one kind of valuable lesson I learned early in my career was when I was working at a hedge fund and kind of pitching stocks into my portfolio manager. And I go in there, like being a former equity research analyst, I would go in and I was ready to give like my 15-minute monologue on XYZ stock. And he goes, "Joel, let me stop you there. If you can't deliver this story in 2 minutes, then get that blank out of my office. This is not going to work well." So I learned to be really 1, 2, 3, boom. So I think, whether it's on the phone or on an email, really, really tight messaging that shows the story and you can deliver kind of the nuts and bolts of your product or capability or service. That's critical.
That is huge advice. I feel like everybody's going to complain when they have that one boss who's like, "If you can't give this to me in 2 minutes, get out of my office." And yet like everybody I know that has a great story of like, this was this thing that someone told me and it actually really changed my trajectory. Getting kicked out of somebody's office because you weren't succinct enough is a good place to start. But like, we all need that boss at some point. I feel like that's somehow fallen out of vogue, giving people that direct feedback, but that's huge advice.
And also listening. You do the talking, let the client talk, hear what their questions, concerns, motivations are, and use that to inform your dialogue.
That's great.
Once again, thank you to Joel Simkins for joining today's episode of Outfoxed. If you liked what you heard, please like, subscribe, and explore even more the Outfoxed community by visiting www.outfoxed.hunter.io. He was Joel Simkins, that was Matt Tharp, and we're out of time.